All right. Hi, everybody. Actually, this is Friday that I'm recording this, so I just saw you all, and it was really great to see you and to get to hang out with you guys. Still not quite as good as being together. And I am glad to hear that you're finding ways to enjoy being home. And I'm sure that in some ways you just like being able to manage your own time. And so I hope that you're also learning how to be independent learners and that you're also enjoying some good books. So before we start talking about the next four chapters of Out of the Road and a little review, speaking of books, I got something to say. So in your packet this week, you're going to get something that looks like this, and it says sixth grade book report. So many of you will remember, if you think really hard, that before spring break, the last week I gave you the week off and said all you have to do for reading is to do a book report on some book that you've read. And you're going to do a summary. This explains what to do. It tells just the basic elements of a story. Tell me what the main character is a little bit about, what their characteristics are, what they want. We know about that from writing stories, what the main problem of the story is, how the characters solve the problem, and the result of the story. So you do that for your own book. And then you also do this one, which summarizes it in a different way. Who are the characters? What's the setting? What's the problem? What's the solution? And in the middle, the theme. What do you think the big idea of the story you read is? Now, you are getting graded on this, so please do a decent job, but I'm going to give you almost 3 more weeks. So since we have cut back your workload, please take the time to enjoy a good book. Do an audio book. Go sit out in your backyard. By all means, enjoy it. I wish I had time to do audiobooks right now. I'm still pretty busy. Teachers are crazy busy. But this is part of your assignment. So you'll see it in RenWeb. You'll see it in your packet. So, and that is for you to pick your own book and tell me about it. All right. And hats off to Elizabeth, who gets extra credit for being the only one that turned hers in. All right. Next thing, what I want you to do is, it's going to be smart for you always in Bible and in literature to have your questions with you while you watch the video, because I'm not necessarily going to answer them explicitly, that means word for word, but I am going to make sure that I cover it, and so there's not going to be any excuse for you not understanding what to write. Of course, you can always go back and listen to the video again, but it's a good idea to have this handy. So if you want to pause for a minute and go get your questions for this week, there are 5. They're not too long, but 5 important aspects of the story for this week. So before I get into some slides and talk a little bit about what you're going to see, last week, let me look back at my notes. So you've gotten to know the characters. You learned a lot about Perkin and Mick, and you met Roger finally when he came. And I don't know how many of you watched the heraldry video, but it's, yeah, that was an optional one. So I don't know if you did that. I don't know how many of you watched the jousting video. I thought that one was really interesting. When I was in England, I actually got to stand next to one of those lances that they carry, and they're like 50 pounds. I don't know how on earth the jousters, these men in all that armor, many pounds of armor, on a horse with that long lance, I don't know how on earth they managed to, well, it was quite a deadly sport actually, but really hard. So you also read about Adam trying to make friends with Hugh and Geoffrey, and you saw that the way he got around it was really by sharing Bayard, and the kids began to respect him for not just being the minstrel's kid, but also knowing quite a bit about horses and tilting. And so the thing was about Adam, he was an educated kid. He could speak French, he could speak Latin, he could move in the circles of people that they were entertaining. He wasn't, and Roger wasn't like some of the minstrels who told kind of common stories that, I don't want to say they were dirty, but sometimes that made jokes about the church, or that used crude language, or that were a little on the sexual side. There were a lot of minstrels that, just like TV today. I mean, your parents probably wouldn't let you watch half of, they wouldn't let you watch 9/10 of what's on TV, right? Because it's crude and the humor is bad, and the morality, their standards of behavior aren't good. So it's not much different today. If you're a Christian and you're a person with convictions and you want to follow the word of God, you don't dress like other people all the time. You don't speak like them. You don't tell stories like they do and jokes like they do. You have a limit, you have a line. And your line is to be respectful of others and to tell things and be uplifting. So Roger's that kind of minstrel, and that's the way he's raised Adam. You can tell from the beginning of the book that Adam's been raised well and he's humble. So you encountered something, a quote that I asked you to look at about the road, where Roger told Adam that the road was kind of a holy thing. And I told you that that was setting up the stage for this big idea in the book about the road, and the road being a symbol or a big theme in the book. And I talked about the road of life. So it's definitely a symbol for life and the way we grow and change. It's definitely a place of adventure, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So I had you look at a few quotes that, so we'll jump into that in a minute. And then I had you do that one worksheet about the blush of boys to see how many other names of groups of things you could come up with. So hopefully you had a little bit of fun with that with your family. So now, maybe with your family, I mean asking them what else is there, trying to come up with these group names that all came from the Middle Ages. So we're going to start on chapter 7, and I would like you to have your book. So if you want to pause again and go get it, but I've got mine right here. Chapter 7 is called Red in the Morning. And the last thing that had happened in chapter 6 was that Roger had fallen into a sin that many people with idle time fall into, and that is gambling. He played a dice game, but he played for money. And when he lost money, then he had to pay it back. And so rather than stopping and walking away, he put all his money on the horse, Bayard, and he gambled away the horse. So I'm asking you a why question, and I'm asking you the very last thing in chapter 6 that happens is that Roger comes walking up to Adam in the morning and asks him, "Do you have your purse?" And Adam says, "Yeah, why do you ask?" And he basically says, "Well, keep it close and don't let it out of your sight, because if I ask you for it, don't even give it to me." And Adam's all, "Okay." And so then he tells him that he lost his money, all of it, and he gambled Bayard away the night before. And he looks at Adam and he says, "Well, say something," because he's his dad and he feels convicted. He's made a horrible mistake and been a terrible example. And so Adam is fighting back the tears about Bayard. And so Roger says, "Say it, say something." And when he finally says something, Adam says something that makes no sense to Roger. He says, "It'll be pretty hard on Hugh." Now, I'm not going to tell you what that means, but I want you to tell me, why would Adam say that? Roger had no clue, but the book has told you earlier. So that's where we left off. The next chapter, actually, you know what? I just gave away something. Sorry about that. I'm assuming that a lot of you are reading ahead. So I made a mistake. I just gave away the end of chapter 7. That was chapter 7. Because chapter 7 is Jenkin, and Jenkin shows up again. And one thing that there's a lot of discussion in chapter 7 about a wedding. Lady Emily gets married and they won't let her marry Sir, what's his name? The squire that Adam's gotten to know, because he doesn't have money. She has to marry somebody that has wealth and money and somebody that's approved of by her parents. And in that chapter, it's interesting in this chapter 7, that as they're playing knights, they joke about them them writing for their liege lady. So they pretend like Marjorie is their liege lady, somebody that they're going to fight for, and she's going to give them her handkerchief. And at the end, they're going to come and bow to her, and it's as though they do it for her honor. And because that's what happened in real life when they had these competitions. They did them to honor some lady. That goes back to chivalry, showing women honor. And Adam can't figure that out because he's figured out that in real life, girls don't have any rights. They can't go to school. They don't get to pick who they're going to marry. And so in this chapter, he comments that he's kind of confused about all that. But one of the things that happens in chapter 7 is that, I'll share my slide with you in a minute, but because of the wedding, the minstrels are all there for this big, huge party, and other minstrels are there. Adam has never seen so many minstrels in one place. And what they do is, and I couldn't find a good picture on the internet, in the great hall of a castle, there'll be a table that's elevated in the front, so you can see that table. It's called the dais, D-A-I-S, and all the guests of honor and the lord of the castle and his friends sit there. If you notice, it looks a lot like a wedding, doesn't it? Have you been to a wedding where the bride and the groom and all the wedding parties sit up in the front on a big table, usually up on a stage or somewhere? That comes from the Middle Ages. And then down below, all the people are sitting at the other tables. There's dogs, there's musicians. You can see there's a little stand over there with all kinds of musicians. And it's a lot like a wedding. All kinds of music going on, maybe some dancing. They push the tables aside later and make space. And then at the end of the night, they take the tables apart, they push everything aside, they throw straw on the floor, and all the minstrels sleep in the great hall. And any guests that they have that maybe that they don't have room for. So the great hall of a castle is where all these big events happen, and that's basically what it looks like. I have another picture on the slides, but it doesn't look very realistic. And so also in this chapter, we get to meet Jenkin as a minstrel and some of the other minstrels, and it refers to some of the things they play: a tabor, a psaltery, a harp. And so I'm going to share my screen. I want to show you a couple pictures of what sorry, the stupid thing gets in my way and I can't select. So let me go back to, here's the one picture that I have of a great hall. It's staged, but you can see there's the main, the days where the guest of honor sat, and then the long benches and tables that they just collapse when they're done at the end of the night. Here are a couple pictures. So you might know that in today's world, a lot of times people enjoy reenacting the past, and they enjoy setting up Renaissance fairs or old-fashioned fairs where people literally they play the part of somebody from this time period. So this is a Renaissance fair. That's a type of recorder. This is some other kind of, I think this is a hurdy-gurdy, which hopefully I'll show you later. This is a minstrel, and he's got a drum. And so they were basically the TV. We'll talk about sacred versus secular music in another chapter. I'm going to switch to I'm going to show you some other things, but I want to first, I'm going to go to a couple websites, but I want to show you some instruments. So in the Middle Ages, these are the most popular instruments. This was called a lute. It's kind of a precursor to the guitar. It had many strings, looks a lot like a mandolin, so like a small guitar, a lute. This is as y'all know, recorder, because you probably learned to play one in 2nd grade. They're still actually quite popular. This is a psaltery, and it's sort of a cross between a harp and a dulcimer, which I don't have a picture of. It's kind of a unique instrument. Each string is tuned to its own pitch. So you literally just pluck the different strings. I have something in the class that we didn't get to play with called a music maker that is something like this that I bring for students to play with. Sorry, you don't get to do it. This is called a baran. It's a hand drum, or a tabor is a hand drum. They're very popular. Celtic music that I play, like fiddle music, they still use this. And this is called a viol. It's like an early violin, and you can see it has a bow, but the violin is still going to evolve a long ways from this. And that's a harp, and Adam plays the harp. So I'm going to show you a couple other, I'm going to reduce this, I think. I'm going to exit that. And I'm going to go to a couple of other links. Some of the links I've put in my slides haven't had sound, so I was a little nervous about that. So I want to play you another. This is one of the coolest, I should save that for last. Here's a really cool medieval instrument. We'll just play a little bit of it, but I just wanted you to see it. Okay, it'll take a second. It's a kind of, I don't even know what it's called. It's going to take a minute. So this person is in this big cathedral. Not getting any music. So wait till you see this guy. Isn't that like the most giant guitar you've ever seen? Can you see how many strings it has? But in a lot of ways, it looks, except for that long thing at the top, it's a lot like a guitar is now. Okay, I'm going to stop that. Crazy, huh? And I want you to look at this one. This one's called, oops, what'd I do? This one's called a hurdy-gurdy. This is like a piano, a guitar, and an organ all in one. That's perfect. Keys. But this is a bridge like a violin, and it has strings underneath like a violin, and pegs like a violin. Sounds a little like an organ. All right, I'm going to stop them. I thought those two were pretty cool. So going back to our slides of the minstrels, um, that's actually all I really need to show you from the slides. So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to me. So all of chapter 7 is this setting where all these minstrels are together. There's this big party. It's in the castle. And we get introduced to Jenkin, who's going to show up later in the story. And I kind of gave away what happened at the end with Nick and his dad. So you probably can write that down. The next chapter, in chapter 8, I want to read how it starts. What happens in chapter 8 is that, I think I got all that. In chapter 8, let me read paragraph 1. It says, on the second morning after the wedding, Adam and Roger and Nick set forth on foot. It was still so early that each blade of grass had its drop of dew glistening in the sun, and each tuft and hummock its shadow. Adam's heart lifted to meet the new day. Where would he sleep that night? He didn't know. He only knew that the road lay before him, and in its turns and hollows were new sights and adventures were waiting. Now, why did I read that? Because one of the big ideas of this book is the road. And so as readers, when you read literature, you're looking for what the author says. And this is a huge part of the way you're going to read in 7th grade. You are going to read stories and short stories and poems in a much more in-depth way than you're used to doing. Yes, you're going to talk about the characters and how they grow and how they change, but you're going to be looking at what is the author saying? Does she have a philosophy that she's trying to make you think about? Does she have a belief that's coming through in the story? Is there a big idea in the story, like a theme that she wants the reader to know? And usually the theme has something to do with that, like I said, the name of the book. So I can tell you for certain that this author wanted to tell a story about a journey in life, and she used that road to mean a lot of things. And certainly one of them is adventure. And I know that because I have a quote right there. And so when I write about that, I use this quote in my writing. And that's a big part of 6th grade that you're going to miss this year. We're not going to write an essay where we write about Adam of the Road and we write about the road being a symbol, and we support that idea through the whole essay by putting these quotes and doing footnotes. Mrs. Ettinger is going to have to teach you that next year. And yeah, we're still going to talk about it. So at the end of chapter 8, he is going to, so the name of this chapter is Red in the Morning, and Adam and Roger are on the road again. Another something happens here on page 100. They stop to rest a little bit, and Roger pulls out a note that he has, and he asks Adam to read it, which is really interesting because Roger's educated, but he actually does not know Latin. Adam does. Roger knows French because that's the language of minstrels. So he actually has to ask Adam to read his note. And so right here in the middle of this page, on page 100, Adam starts, he's thinking, I thought I got away from Latin. And so he reads it, Salutum et amoris perpetui firmitatem, which means greetings, that's salutum, and assurances of perpetual love. Perpetui sounds like our word perpetual. Amor is love. And so as he reads this, it's kind of fun. I'd like you to see if you can figure out what any of the words mean. And basically, this is a note that Sir Edmund had given to Roger that he could take anywhere he went. It was a letter of recommendation saying, this minstrel is a good guy, invite him into your home. And then he also gave him a lot of money, which was a good thing. So at the end of chapter 8, they run into Jenkin again. And Jenkin really likes Nick. He keeps giving him attention. He pets him. It's a little bit of foreshadowing. I want you to notice where that is. But at one point on page 103, he actually says to Roger, that's a good dog. He took a silver penny from his purse and he tossed it in the air and he caught it on one hand, heads or tails, clapped it on the other, and he said, I'll match you for him. Call out twice of 3 and you can have the war horse. Fail and I get the dog. Heads or tails, 2 out of 3. No, Roger said shortly, the dog belongs to the boy. Adam glowered at Jenkin and snapped his fingers commandingly at Nick. Nick came to him and Adam picked up the leash. Sit down, he said, and Nick sat, his silky ears pressed close against Adam's leg. Later at the end on page 105, Adam says, I don't like that Jenkin. He wanted to get Nick. Hugh said he'd probably ride Bayard to death. Would he do that, Roger, do you think? A little bit of foreshadowing. Chapter 9. In chapter 9, they're on their way to the fair. And they spend the night at an inn there. And they meet an old man. They call him an old gaffer. And that's not disrespectful. That's just the way it was. And because this book is written in 1300, this old man remembers the Magna Carta. he remembers where he was when his grandfather told him the story about King John being forced to sign the Magna Carta. And as you know from history, the Magna Carta was one of the first documents that limited the rights of kings and said kings are under the law just like everybody else. They can't just do what they want. And America was very much founded on that idea. And so that old guy kind of comments to Adam that sometimes things are going on right under your nose and they're making history, significant things in history or in God's providence. And we're a part of them and we don't even realize that we are at the time. Later that night, Jenkins shows up at the inn, the same place that they are, because everybody's going to the fair. So they're all kind of on the same row. And at the end of that chapter, that's what we would call the inciting moment of the story, where something happens that changes the rest of the story. It doesn't get too exciting until, so chapter 10, they're going to meet, I don't want to give away what happens, but while they're on the road in chapter 10, they're going to meet some pilgrims, and those pilgrims are on their way to do a pilgrimage. As you know, they would do that to visit the saints. And, you know, St. Albans had St. Albans bones, and then you go to another church and it has so-and-so's bones. And they would go to see and touch and pray over those relics, hoping that they'd get extra grace from God. You can see that that's not a really good thing. It's not biblical. They also run into a pardoner, and a pardoner is a priest that would give you a piece of paper that if you gave them money, they would say, here, you can have this indulgence, which was a paper that said your sins were forgiven. And so and actually you could give the church money and you could get the sins forgiven of one of your relatives who was in purgatory. Yeah, where is purgatory? It was the Catholic Church's teaching that there was a place to go to. There was earth, there was heaven, there was hell. But if you lived a good life as a Christian in the church, you could go to purgatory. And in case you weren't quite good enough to get to heaven, you could stay there for a while and people could pray you into heaven. They could pay the church some money and people would pray for your soul, and enough prayers would give you extra grace and you would get to heaven. Again, not biblical. And so all of these things that were unbiblical, this pilgrimages to pray to saints for special favors, these partners giving indulgences and saying, if you just give money to the church, your sins are forgiven. And people would think, oh, good, I'll buy a whole bunch of them and then I'll go out and sin. It was a great program. And that was exactly what Martin Luther was standing up against when he nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg church. He just wanted to talk about it. He wanted to say, hey, this is not okay. I've read my Bible. The Bible says the just shall live by faith and faith alone. And you can't pray your way into heaven from purgatory. So that comes up in chapter 10, which is as far as you're going to read. And chapter 11 is pretty exciting, and that's where all of the problems really start. So I hope you enjoy chapters 7 to 10. I hope you enjoy the reading story that you have this week. It's actually, it's called Shipwrecked, and it's the book that Swiss Family Robinson. It's a story that Swiss Family Robinson was based on. And maybe some of you are using the audiobook to read Swiss Family Robinson, which is it's a really good book. So you have lots of good literature. What's not to love about school, right? You get to go sit in your backyard, listen to a book, read a book, do a little math, get better at math. I'm proud of those of you that are working hard in IXL. You probably can't appreciate how much you're going to value that next year, because 7th grade math is really hard. So work hard on that because you need to. And I'll see you again next week. All right? And have a great weekend. Well, have a great week because you're going to listen to this next week. Bye.